All right, last section over the major hormones of the endocrine system. So we're talking about the adrenal glands and cortisol. So the anatomy of the adrenal glands, they're paired and they're pyramid-shaped endocrine glands that are found on the superior surface of each kidney. So thinking when you get a kidney shot right in the back there, that's where we're going to find our adrenal glands. They're retroperitoneal, meaning they're behind the peritoneal cavity, and they're embedded within fat and fascia. So there are two regions. There's the adrenal medulla and the adrenal cortex. The medulla is the inner core of each of the adrenal glands. It's got a red-brown color due to extensive blood vessels. So it has a lot of blood vessels in there, which again makes sense. Since hormones are helping control the body, they need to have a lot of vascularization to go ahead and help move those hormones to the rest of the body. They're releasing epinephrine and norepinephrine with sympathetic stimulation within the adrenal medulla. So again, that's the core. The adrenal cortex synthesizes more than 25 corticosteroids. It has a yellow color due to lipids within the cells. And there are three regions that produce different steroid hormones. There's the zona glomerularis, the zona fasciculata, and the inner zona reticularis. So hormones of the adrenal cortex, there are the mineralocorticoids, which are hormones that regulate electrolyte levels. They're made in the zona glomerulosa, which is the thin outer cortical layer. And also aldosterone fosters sodium retention and potassium secretion. So remember, when we're thinking minerals, you can think sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, manganese. Those are all the ones that are going to be regulated by the mineralocorticoids. Next are our glucocorticoids, which are hormones that regulate blood sugar, which makes sense, right? Gluco for sugar. And it's made in the zona fasciculata. It's the larger middle cortical layer of the adrenal cortex. Then we have our cortisol, which is found in the glucocorticoids, and it increases blood sugar levels. So cortisol increases blood sugar levels. Our next one is the gonadotropins. So these are our sex hormones that are made in the zona reticularis, the thin inner cortical layer of the adrenal cortex. The androgens are male sex hormones that are made by the adrenals. They're converted to estrogen in females, and then the amount of androgen produced by the adrenals is less than an amount from the testes. So we're going to find the testosterone being built in the testes and then also within the adrenal cortex. All right, so talking about cortisol, which is a glucocorticoid that we find being built in the adrenal cortex. Cortisol and corticosterone increase nutrient levels in the blood. So to resist stress and repair injured tissue, we're going to have an increase in the amount of nutrients in the blood so the cells can have access to that energy. The release regulated is regulated by the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Stress and late stages of sleep and low levels of cortisol stimulate the hypothalamus to release cortisol-releasing hormone. Okay, so the corticoid releasing hormone stimulates the anterior pituitary to release ACTH, and ACTH is the one that stimulates the adrenal cortex to release cortisol and corticosterone. So cortisol travels through the blood. It's attached to a carrier protein, so again, that's going to be a water-soluble hormone, and the small amounts of cortisol are going to disassociate from the carrier and leave the bloodstream depending on where it is in the body. So cortisol diffuses through target cell's membrane and binds to intracellular receptors, and the hormone receptor complex binds to DNA and then activates the genes. So going back to thinking about how the mRNA is going to make a copy of the DNA and then actually stimulate proteins to be produced inside the cell. So cortisol causes target cells to increase blood nutrient levels, like we already mentioned. So liver cells are going to increase their glycogenolysis and their gluconeogenesis, and it decreases the glycogenesis. So adipose cells are going to increase their lipolysis and decrease lipogenesis, and many body cells break down proteins to amino acids. So again, cortisol is just increasing the nutrient levels within our blood. And liver cells are also going to use the amino acids for gluconeogenesis. So most cells decrease their glucose uptake, sparing it for the brain, and our cortisol levels are going to be regulated again by negative feedback. So the more cortisol you have in your bloodstream, it's going to also inhibit the release of cortisol releasing hormone from the hypothalamus and ACTH from the anterior pituitary. So corticosteroid is used as a treatment for inflammation. It inhibits inflammatory agents and suppresses the immune system. High doses have side effects, though. So if you have too much cortisol or too much corticosteroid, you can go ahead and have an increased risk of infections and cancer, an increased retention of sodium and water, and also it inhibits your connective tissue repair. So that's why if you're stressed out all the time, it's not good because it is actually going to increase those factors. So you want to take a look over the clinical disorders. They're interesting to kind of see the different effects of having too much cortisol or a lack of ACTH or ACH or cortisol in the body. But let's talk a little bit about the stress response before we do our check for understanding. So stressors elicit a stress response. Obviously, amazing. And the hypothalamus is going to initiate a neuroendocrine response. So there's 3 stages. You're going to have first your alarm reaction, so the initial response involving sympathetic nervous system activation, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. The second stage is going to be resistance, and after a depletion of glycogen stores, adrenal secretes cortisol to raise your blood sugar and help meet energy demands. And then the third stage is exhaustion. So after weeks or months, depletion of fat stores results in protein breakdown for energy, leading to weakening of the body and illness. All right, so a quick check for understanding at what time of day are growth hormone levels highest, and it's in the nighttime. And then our second question is, what is the function of thyroid follicular cells? They are the receptors for thyroid stimulating hormone, and they release thyroid hormone. And then also our third question is, what is the primary mineral corticoid and what are its specific effects? The primary one is aldosterone, and it fosters sodium retention and potassium secretion.